our heels all day long. And by the way, the only reason we knew this might be coming is because there were some tweets. Yeah, tweets. They weren't from Governor Cuomo, by the way, as far as I know. They weren't from President Trump. They were from random people who were tweeting that something was in the works. Now, we're being asked tonight to appropriate $40 million. It's past 10 o'clock at night. We've had no hearings. We've had no opportunity for the public to know about this. No one in the public, by the way, knows about this bill because the newspapers don't publish after 7 p.m. But we're being asked to vote on a $40 million appropriation. Now, some of you might be asking, what's the emergency? Why do we have to vote in the middle of the night? Here's a news flash for you. None of the banks in the state of New York are open at 10 p.m. at night. The comptroller earlier was over enjoying himself with the Farm Bureau, where I wish I was. So the comptroller's not cutting any checks at 10 p.m. at night, is he? There's no RFPs going out at 10 p.m. tonight seeking medical supplies. There is no emergency tonight at 10 p.m. And nothing we do at 10 p.m. is going to have one iota of difference in our timing and our ability to fight this virus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. New York's governor is one of the most powerful governors in the country. He's got extraordinary powers under the Constitution, something we bump into every time we deal with the budget. And he has sweeping, extraordinary emergency powers under Section 29A of the executive law. And the Commissioner of Health has even more sweeping emergency powers under the public health law, including the power to make all sorts of emergency regulations on a finding that they promote the public health. These powers have actually served us well over the decades that they've been on the books. They served us well during the Ebola crisis, swine flu, during Hurricane Sandy. The health department used its powers to make sure that people got to health care, that people were moved from one nursing home to another in safety. During the worst of the HIV crisis, no governor, no health commissioner ever had occasion to ask for anything like the powers that the governor is asking for in this bill. I've been involved in this topic for decades through, 6 governors. I've never seen any governor or health commissioner ask for this kind of expansion of power through all of those various crises. You might ask, what does this bill do? It makes some changes that seem to be technical in those emergency powers, but it's not entirely clear, and I'll get back to that a little later. One thing the bill very clearly does do, which we've seen this governor push through before in recent years, what it does do is give the governor very extensive and almost unlimited affirmative legislative power to not only waive existing laws and provisions of existing laws, which he now has authority to do, but it also empowers him to essentially make new legislation by issuing directives, quote unquote, to any New Yorker. I think it's important to ask why. What problem does this bill solve? You might say, well, we've got this virus coming. Yes, but what does this bill enable a governor or a health commissioner to do that they can't do today? And we don't have an answer to that question. You know, those of us on the majority side, we spent more than an hour this afternoon listening to Health Commissioner Zucker talking about this epidemic. And his main message was essentially, keep calm, we're on this, you know, wash your hands with soap and warm water and keep social distance, et cetera, et cetera. But basically it was, don't panic, keep calm, we're on top of this. Never did the health commissioner say, well, you know, if we want local health departments to do something, we've got to tell them individually to do it, or we can waive provisions of a law, including all of the provisions, but we can't waive, it doesn't say we can waive the whole law. We've got to say we're waiving all the provisions of the law. The health commissioner never said that. The health commissioner never said, you know, we're on this, but we really need some laws changed. Please help us. He never said that. And the governor hasn't said that. And during I've been in the assembly through 8 governors. I have never heard a governor or a health commissioner, through all the miscellaneous problems we've had during the last 50 years, ask for this kind of power.
Bill, sir.
You know, every once in a while, and probably too often these days, something happens that really shows you how fragile life can be, how fragile our government could be, how fragile our economic system can be. A sort of threat like this sends the stock market into a tailspin, starts to get people worried, starts to get conversations about how would you close schools, what would you do with public events. And it's incumbent upon us as lawmakers, I think, to make sure that the state is prepared, to make sure that people understand that the state does have tools at its disposal, but to make sure that you're doing everything possible to improve upon rules, procedures, actions the health department can take. When this bill was put forth today, and I had a chance to read it, I came to the conclusion that it does 4 very simple things. This is not a tremendous expansion of executive power that can be used to upend any of our state laws. I see it as seeking to address what is a possible impending disaster, health disaster, for the people of our state that I think almost every single family in our districts right now is thinking about. It does 4 things. 1, in the definition of disaster, it adds impending or urgent to the prior imminent. And the prior speaker from the other side of the aisle kind of touched on this a bit, and I think almost made the point of why I support this bill. The suggestion that right now, with only 1 person in New York currently having coronavirus, it may not fit the prior definition of imminent. So maybe we need to change the law to ensure that it's not just imminent, but that it may be impending or urgent. So while we only may have 1 case right now in New York, we've certainly seen what's happening in Washington, we certainly see what's happening in other countries, and we certainly know that at any time this could spiral out of control. There weren't testing protocols set up for a while, so there could be people out there right now that just haven't been tested, Mr. Speaker, but have this disease. So I ask my colleagues to just look at the language of the bill and make a decision on whether or not you support these simple changes. I support the changing of imminent to also include impending or urgent. 2, it adds disease outbreak, including an epidemic. Now, I, for one, do not want to wait to see whether or not we are debating over whether it has risen to the level of epidemic. I want to give the governor and I want to give the health commissioner the ability to take action if it is just a disease outbreak, because I don't want it to get to an epidemic. So for part two of the changes in this bill, Mr. Speaker, I agree with that as well. The third change, it allows the governor to issue directives. Fair point that this could be a change. And fair point that perhaps in the past governors have taken action and given directives when this provision gave them the authority to merely suspend laws. Well, I ask my colleagues to consider that. In addressing a public health crisis, should the governor be able to issue directives, or should he or she be able to only suspend laws? To me, I think they should be able to issue directives. There was a bit of questions before in the debate about what could be done and do we know? Well, I could envision things the governor may have to do. Perhaps the governor and the health department may have to set up quarantine protocols. Perhaps they may have to issue directives to close certain public areas, certain public buildings. They may have to issue travel restrictions. I don't know, these would all be directives, but I don't necessarily think they would fall neatly in the box of suspending laws. So on that third item, Mr. Speaker, I would also support that change. The fourth thing is the money, $40 million. May be too much, may be too little. If it's too little, we may be talking in a few weeks about appropriating more money. And if it's too much, well, it's set for handling the coronavirus. So I think if only $2 million or $10 million or $20 million are needed, then the balance of that, God willing, in a few weeks, it'll only have been one case. That person will have gotten better and will be on the downslide of this epidemic, this disease outbreak, this whatever you want to call it, but this very worrisome outbreak to a lot of our residents. So I, for one, Mr. Speaker, on the fourth item that I see in this bill, the $40 million, would support that allocation, hope it's enough, and believe that when I go back to my district at the end of this week, I can tell my residents that we have taken definitive action to ensure that that one outbreak, that one person right now, doesn't turn into 1,000, doesn't turn into 10,000, doesn't turn into 100,000. The rest of the bill, Mr. Speaker, is cleaning up language, as I see it. The second part of the bill adds directive to the rest of the section. It redefines disaster using the exact language that was previously in the bill, and really doesn't give any other additional powers. So I understand the concern of my colleagues. I understand that we should be looking at expansions of executive power to ensure that there is still a robust debate amongst the legislative process. However, I just don't see the threat in this bill. And quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, I think that this is our duty as legislators to respond quickly, efficiently, and effectively to this public health crisis before it becomes an epidemic, before it becomes a pandemic, before it becomes something that wreaks havoc in all of our communities and of all of our homes across this state. That's why, Mr. Speaker, I'll be voting in the affirmative, and I would ask my colleagues to also. Thank you.